Space, the final frontier. Well, okay, not really. All right, take two. Here in the Mitten State, welcome to Code 47, bringing you all things Star Trek, spanning the quadrants, the best thing since the neutral zone.
And we are back here on the Secret Friends Unite Network. This is the Code 47 podcast, episode 65, coming at you from the great state of Michigan. I am Charlie Carden, Trek Lord of West Michigan, captain of the USS Grand Petoskey, the West Michigan chapter of the Starfleet International Fan Club, joined as always by my awesome co-host, Katie Q. Katie, how are you doing this wonderful Saturday evening?
I am doing fantastic. I have a drink in my Harley Quinn tumbler glass, so I'm ready to go.
Oh goodness, I did a little bit too much pregame, and I left my drink in the other room. So we might have to have a cesura, as they say in music, and a little pause between segments. I got to refill my drink, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, we're back. We're in the thick of it, talking about Star Trek Discovery. We're on our third of four segments talking about the second season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. So without further ado, we'll get into that. But we do have two things before we jump into that. We've got a great a VHS cover from episode 65 of Star Trek, the original series, which Katie, you and I were talking earlier today. I know it's not your favorite.
What is happening in this cover, Charlie?
What
did you send me?
I'm remembering this episode, the Enterprise, and again, this is a very late in the series episode, because again, the original series only had 79 episodes. This was episode 65. They found this like big rock in space that was like a planetoid, but it was traveling at like high velocity. It was going to hit a planet, so they had to beam aboard it and try to figure out a way to stop it or whatever. And so in this, they find as Kirk, they, with any supercomputer, they find the brain of it. But when Kirk and Spock touch it, they get this like terrible 60s like photo effect to it. So okay. It's a little ridiculous.
No, that's not. Folks, I'm going to describe this to you as someone who has not seen the episode.
Please.
So there is a pyramid, like a very, very minimalist robot, I guess you could say. It's basically like kind of an upside down triangle with a regular triangle, like on top of a regular triangle. And then you have a basically orange overlay on Spock and Kirk, who look like they're a little too involved with this minimalist robot figure, because Kirk is like caressing it and like pressed against it, and Spock, I don't know what Spock's doing in the back, but this does not. This may has me. There's a lot of questions. I'll just put it that way. I know I just started like 4 sentences and stopped halfway through, but that's because I just don't know what to say about this.
I would, and plus this also has the longest name for any single episode. For the World is Hollow, and I Have Touched the Sky. And again, at some point in the future, Peter is my guy who covers TOS because Katie refuses to, so He'll be back. So we will talk about this episode at that time, but I will certainly remember this conversation when we do. But yeah, looks like this aired in November of 1968, and boy, does it look like it. So anyway, moving on, we do actually have a news story this week. What I respectfully dub segment 50% or one half or half of the Starfleet dispatches. I don't like to mess with the order of things. But yeah, there was an announcement from Viacom this week. As all corporations are doing, they are rebranding. Paramount Plus is simply going to become Paramount. So it's a plus and a minus. Which makes sense. They're going on more of a global scale. They're trying to find something a little bit more universal. What works for Disney Plus obviously doesn't work for everybody. But yeah,
I think it's Viacom CBS rebranded as Paramount. So I think they're still keeping Paramount Plus. They're just actually changing their name.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So Viacom CBS now, instead of being called Viacom CBS, they're just Paramount. So everything's Paramount instead of like the global CBS thing, I think.
Right, exactly. Makes sense to me because again, keep it all in the family, as it were. But this came from a Viacom investors call. where they talked a little bit more about Strange New Worlds, which is awesome. We're going to get that in May. I'm super fired up about that because I love the character of Captain Pike. Because the gray hair. This character I love cosplaying. But we did end up getting an announcement about something. I would. I wouldn't say I'm fired up about, but I want to, I don't want to embrace the concept of militant fanboyism and saying, "Well, this really sucked," and blah, 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 blah. The J.J. Abrams Kelvin timeline, which started in 2009 with Star Trek, followed with Star Trek Into Darkness in 2013, and wrapped up in 2016 with Star Trek Beyond, gave us Chris Pine as Captain Kirk and Zachary Quinto as Spock, yada, yada, yada. So gave us a lot of big names rebooting the original series. Really didn't adhere to canon in any way, shape, or form. Played very loosely with the fact that this was a spin-off universe, whatever it is. But I myself didn't care for the storytelling. I can see the value in the fact that it probably opened it up to potentially a wider audience. But, Katie, you're sitting here watching these older Star Treks with me. What are your thoughts on the Kelvin universe?
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying, like the Paramount Star Trek thing or the Paramount CBS, I was like, okay, that's fine. I feel like they're like you were saying, kind of like Disney's trying to put like all their eggs in one basket with their Paramount's like, we are Star Trek. And I'm like, that's great. This isn't like, you're not Disney. Like, and this isn't Marvel.
Right.
But in all fairness, like I enjoyed the original reboot, if that makes sense.
The 2009 film. That's what
the 2009. I was like, okay, and it felt kind of like the same way that they did with Star Wars, where they're like, we're going to make it enough the same so that like we can kind of play an homage to the original and then make our own stuff. Like they had, Leonard Nimoy come in as Spock, and they're like, cool, this is how it ties in. Now we can go do our own thing. And then they did Into Darkness, and they were like, oh, by the way, we're just retelling an old story. This isn't Wrath of Khan, but it's Wrath of Khan. And
super thumbs down.
I honestly, the most compelling thing about Star Trek Beyond was the chick on the cover next to Spock and Kirk.
Yeah, Jayla. That was her name.
That was the most interesting thing about that movie. I literally could not tell you what that movie was about. I did not remember what the movie was called until I looked at this news thing, and it was on the side of like shop-related products. So I had no interest in it whatsoever.
I mean, that's bad. That's terrible because, how does that speak to the brand? It just absolutely sinks it.
Star Trek, for me, the parts that I find really engaging are the quandaries that happen, like the philosophical discussions of like the moral gray areas. Like, what do we do when we're put in these impossible situations? And it seemed like they were more focused on like the action-packed sequences where they're like, we have to make it big, we have to make it bold, it has to be crazy special effects and these dynamic fight scenes. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, but there's no real like conversation happening. And I mean, Abrams is really great at giving me some lens flare and really beautiful cinematics, but honestly, it didn't seem like they were really good storytellers because they didn't understand the heart of what Star Trek was.
Exactly my point. Yeah, it was JJ, and this was, and again, 2009 and in 2013, and again, Star Trek Beyond, which came out in 2016, was directed by Justin Lin, who I think was the Fast and Furious guy who was involved in that franchise. It was just a complete mismatch for what Star Trek is all about. Star Trek is, again, it's social commentary. It's looking at things that are happening in our world through a sci-fi lens, and those three films had none of that. It was just, and JJ really wanted to, and in 2015 he got his chance because he made The Force Awakens. He wanted to make Star Wars, and he tried to do it with Star Trek, and it was just it was a fart in church as far as I'm concerned. It just did not. It just absolutely didn't land. So, going on, and again, I know April can hear me upstairs. She's going to be like, I like those movies. That's okay.
Yeah,
honey, I love you. It's okay.
I'm glad to know that I'm not going to be witness to a divorce or anything. At this point.
Guess I don't think the expressions were really that significant. And again, through me, April has now watched the entirety of Star Trek because we had a 3 or 4 year mission where we watched absolutely everything together.
My condolences to her for having to sit through all of TOS.
Oh. It's kind of like TAS is the worst one. That original 70s animated series. And again, I covered that with my former co-host Rich back last summer, I think. And man, that is just again, you and I were revising up the schedule, and I know that you're going to sit in and do Deep Space Nine with me starting in several weeks. But I wouldn't wish Star Trek the Animated Series on my worst enemy. It's just really difficult to watch.
Yeah, listeners, Charlie asked me to stay on a more permanent basis, and I thought about it. I was like, okay, here's the deal: I will not do Enterprise, and I will not do the original series.
Yes, contract negotiations were executed, and those were the terms. And and as having as much fun as I do with Katie, I willfully agree. Peter will return to talk about the animated the original series with me, and to talk about Enterprise as well. So we will still continue to be the three-sided triangle, as it were. But yeah, so we were obviously promised several months ago we were going to see a Star Trek film. Now we find out that it's going to be this. I know that JJ is still producing. They picked another director, and again, I don't have that in front of me, but Star Trek for me personally has always been this unconditional love affair. I'll go, I'll see it, I'll find a way to embrace it, but I don't have to be happy about it, but that's what love is. Sometimes you get disappointed, and that's really what I'm counting on. So, I'll tell you what, if you feel differently, fair listeners, and you absolutely love the Kelvin universe and you love the J.J. Abrams interpretation of Star Trek, please hit us up on Twitter at SecretFriendsU or at the C3, which is my personal Twitter, and let me know that I'm wrong, because again, my opinion is no different than the opinion of absolutely anybody out there. I don't have any illusions on being some kind of Trek, a la that I know absolutely everything, but I mean, I do know everything. It doesn't make my opinion any more valid. So anyway, moving on, we've got 2 new episodes to look at this week. And again, Katie, you and I were talking about the schedule, and this is really going to explode in the next several weeks, because Discovery is going to start to overlap with Picard the first part of March. So our episodes are going to get longer and longer. So I hope you enjoy the sounds of our voice, because there's going to be more of us. But at any rate, we've got 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery to talk about this week. The first one is episode 8, All In. Following a hunch, Captain Burnham tracks Book to an old haunt from their courier days, which of course happened in the gap year that she had when they arrived in season 3, where she and Book were getting cozy, and gets drawn into a high stakes competition for a powerful weapon. What'd you think, Katie?
I can see why this wouldn't be necessarily a fan favorite, as coming back from a mid-season break, it was kind of, I would say, like, slow, quote unquote, in like the action moving the plot directly forward. But overall, I enjoyed it as just kind of coming in, giving a pause to all of like the crazy action that was going on, and it gave things kind of time to simmer. And it's a thing that I like about Discovery, is that it's not that kind of like bam, 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 bam action. It takes time to marinate on those moments of kind of like like we were saying, like the human moments of like the struggles that you have, where like Book and Burnham get along really well. They love each other, but they are at these fundamental crossroads where both of them can understand and empathize with what the other person is going through. But that doesn't change their mind, and it doesn't change their position, which is kind of how things happen in real life. I like that.
Owasaku. Joanne. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Owasaku, that she was brought in, as sad as I was to see Tilly go, I love that this might mean that we get some more chance with the other bridge crew members, because we haven't really seen her shine since season 3. I think it was the season finale in season 3, where she's a badass and was like holding her breath for like 10 minutes.
Right, exactly. Or earlier in season 3, when they had the awkward dinner party and everybody was arguing with each other. So I'd like that. And then again, subsequently in the next episode, they have the Asian character and the black character. I think I'm trying to remember their positions. One's the tactical officer, and maybe one's the communications officer. Yeah, and they're like full on going. So it's like they're really stepping it up, trying to flesh out these bridge officer characters. And it reminds me of the fact that in TOS, all of the characters that we came to know, Sulu and Uhura and Scotty, whatever it is, were not starring characters in the original series. The only starring characters were Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. They're the only ones that got title credit, but we still got episodes where, Nurse Chapel had an episode, and, Uhura had significant this and that or whatever it is. So I like that they're kind of plugging this in, and I like Joanne. She even got a significant role in a season 2 episode when Captain Pike was involved, because it was revealed that, she joined an away mission because she grew up in this like Luddite, almost, anti-technology. What's the word I'm looking for? Like the Amish. She grew up in like an Amish community, and they were beaming down to a planet that was really technologically kind of backwards, and she was critical. So I like that. And again, it's super cool that she's, kind of Jane Badass, in the boxing ring. So it's just, it was a cool stripe. So I totally agree that.
I still say they didn't actually ever say this one way or the other, but it still felt like she totally rolled that dude. Like she was just taking falls at the first part, because then she came in and just wailed on him.
It's like somebody who's hustling in like a pool game.
That dude.
Yeah, she's hustling that dude. My kind of favorite part of this episode is this was like Haz Mazzaro, because I actually have the Memory Alpha page up, was the kind of the deal maker hustler shady dude who was this episode. I call him Mr. Easter Egg, because he was throwing out like, I'm throwing out this Cardassian this and this Brussels fly that, and this Devore, which is a Voyager reference, like weird little this. He was kind of Mr. Easter Egg, and I absolutely adore that we got to see one of the founders from Deep Space Nine. We got to see a changeling in this episode. And I'm like, that's super cool that they have this community of the entirety of and again, I always refer to the map behind me, the entirety of the of the Milky Way galaxy, split into 4 quadrants, is now extremely united, because there is obviously, there's no issue with, traveling 70,000 light years. So, you're going to see, and I think we saw that even earlier in the season when they had the big intergalactic conference, you have, the Xindi and the Kazon and all these different species that are spread across, all of Star Trek now being able to interact with each other because of superior technology and different, wormholes and different ways to travel. So I love that. I would love to learn more about what the Dominion looks like in the 32nd century. You know what I mean? Is it integrated? Is it integrated? Are the Vorta, did they declare independence? Are the Jem'Hadar no longer a slave species? I would love to see, that would satisfy the Deep Space Nine lover in me, and the fact that Deep Space Nine has just absolutely gotten the shaft in this postmodern era, because all that anybody wants to talk about is TOS and Kirk and Spock and McCoy. And no, I grew up on TNG and DS9. I want to know, and DS9 never got anything. Voyager never got anything. Voyager's getting another chance with Prodigy, and we're seeing those characters come back to life. But what about Deep Space Nine? It's absolutely killing me. So that was probably my favorite part of this episode. We got a little taste of Deep Space Nine, and I really hope that it was not just a throwaway. So that's what I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Well, I mean, and we've had references of that even with the president, where she's saying, before, like, I would not have, like, I am physically, proof that the Federation works as being part Cardassian. And
Bajoran and human, which is completely crazy. Yeah.
So, I thought that was like a really great tie-in, and I think that it's one of the things I really like about Discovery is that it definitely it feels like they take their time to build a fully fleshed world, where even when you have characters like, some of the bridge crew, where they're maybe not using them every episode, they're still showing them and their reactions to what Burnham is talking about. Like you saw, Detmer and Osakun, they're always making, looks at each other like, oh gosh, what is she saying? What's going on here? What's going on here? So you're always getting their reactions. And again, it just makes it feel more lived in, which I really like.
Exactly. So, all right, moving on. Episode 9.
Oh, yes.
Is Rubicon, which is, it invokes the classic images of, crossing your final frontier. Captain Burnham and the USS Discovery race to stop Book and Ruan Tarka from launching the rogue plan that could inadvertently endanger the galaxy. So this was your big action episode, without a doubt. You had a lot of interplay of, ship combat and, tense negotiations and, wanting to, give me a chance to negotiate this thing or that, give us a week before this thing jumps away. And again, this Ruan Tarka, who is, the quasi villainous character. He stated his motivations that like, well, I just want a chance to recover my life and make the exactly. So I still don't. I still don't necessarily believe that he's given us his full story, because at the end of this, even though Book does decide to stand down, Tarka still flips a couple of buttons, which I feel like you could have just turned his panel off and made sure he couldn't do that, but again, Monday morning quarterback. But he launches his weapon at the last minute. He blows up the mining device that has been the DMA that has been going through and destroying planets, which obviously our Federation friends and obviously the Discovery crew things could have could trigger the next galactic intergalactic conflict, but at the end of it we find out that the species 10C who controls that device simply drops in another one, and that's our cliffhanger moment. Ooh my god, what is going to happen now? And has now opened up. I know I posted an article on Secret Friends a little while ago to who exactly who is species 10C? They're from outside the galaxy. What are they trying to do? What are they trying to do? So it's this was a suitable cliffhanger, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and it's, again, one of those things where I really like that, Nan was back. Yes. Love to see that. She's great.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And they did a lot where they were once again pulling from other stuff that had happened. Like Nan and Burnham have a great conversation that kind of ties into Burnham's own lessons back during the loss of life that she experienced with the space station. You know, because she knows that Nan is very black and white. It is very right or wrong. And when, again, they're having these moments of dealing with shades of gray and trying to navigate a very difficult and impossible situation, she's just trying to find that common ground, which has become a repeated theme with Burnham, which is, again, I really like how her character has developed that way. I feel like they kind of did Tarkon dirty. Like, as much as I hate his character, when you're looking at characters that are so fully fleshed out and his character is just like kind of cartoonish with his villainy, it just right. Yeah. He's like, no, absolutely. Too much. Like, he was introduced as like this like egomaniac where he's like, I'm obviously a super genius, and he's like telling Stamets that he's basically an idiot, and I'm like, okay, come on, dude, this guy has revolutionized like the spore drive, like come on, shut up, he's fine. And it seems like the writers didn't they made him very one note, which I was kind of disappointed by. Like, I hate the dude, I hate him, and I love to hate him, but it just also felt very transparent. And at some points I was like, come on, Book, like, are you really gonna fall for this? Like, this guy is literally saying, hey, I'm gonna do something that could literally start a war with an incredibly advanced species across your entire galaxy, and then I'm gonna peace out, motherfucker, and go to my own universe, so you have to deal with the consequences.
Right, like, exactly. So yeah, why would you talk about betting on the wrong horse and hitching your wagon to where you shouldn't hitch your wagon? So yeah, it's bad, and but yeah, even more compelling is what we're going to see next week, of which, in our next episode, we'll be talking about those next two, and even getting into talking about Picard, because we'll have the first episode of that under our belt by that time. So, yeah, I'm real curious to see, now that Species 10C has figured out, oh, what the hell happened to our drilling platform? I guess we ought to drop another one in there. So again, as they pointed out in the first episode here, they're like, well, this is just their mining device. So what the hell do their weapons look like? Oh, I bet we don't want to know about that, so we probably shouldn't poke the bear. But now they poke the bear, so what's going to happen now?
Well, and that's the thing, is it's like, because the episode ended with them being like, oh, well, I guess we've made first contact. And part of me, I was like, they might not have thought that anything like bad happened to it. Sometimes when you're using a drill, your bit breaks, and so you got to get a new drill. You put a new bit on it, and then there you go. You don't think, oh, well, what was in the wood that broke my bit?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. So fingers crossed.
Let's hope that they don't decide to go, oh, squish, and you're all toast anyway. So yeah, I'm really super excited to see where this goes, because this is this could have some pretty crazy consequences. So all right, so wrapping it up and segueing into segment 2. I know I can't get Katie to sing again, but I'm going to ask. It's been a
Absolutely
long
not.
road. And,
Absolutely
oh, that's okay. You know what? All I can do is try. That's all right. But anyway, we're now into the third of 4 segments talking about season 2 of Star Trek: The Next Generation, Jumpsuit Land Extraordinaire. So we got 6 episodes to cover here. So we're just gonna jump right in. I'll do the first one. Episode 11 is Contagion. This was directed by Joseph L. Scanlon, written by Steve Gerber and Beth Woods. Again, not huge names that I can remember. Aired the week of March 20 in 1989. The Enterprise and the Romulan Warbird are attacked by the same computer virus that has already destroyed one Federation starship, the same class as the Enterprise, which is not really relevant. But this is the episode that introduces like this super cool race that you end up seeing later in Deep Space Nine called the Iconians, an ancient, now extinct race who had a homeworld in the Romulan neutral zone that had these kick-ass gateways that could instantaneously transport you from one world to the next. So this was, for me, kind of a standout for season 2. I thought it was very Star Trek-y. It was well written. You had some great Picard, a little bit more action moments because he insisted on doing this away team where he and Data and Worf beamed down to the Iconian homeworld to try to master this software to save the Enterprise. I really dug this episode. I thought this was a good one. And again, this was during the period of time that I wasn't watching the show every week. So I saw this a couple of years later when I really, was a serious fan of the show. And I was like, this is super cool. I really dug this episode. It had a lot of great Star Trek elements. This was the first big episode where you explore the Romulans a little bit because their reintroduction was only in a very brief cameo at the end of season 1. So this was our first kind of big Romulan blowout. So I really dug it. I thought it was a good one.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed again the dynamicism between Picard, Data, and Worf, because that's not a trio that you normally see together a lot at this point.
Right.
So I thought that the approaches that all 3 of them had was a very cool way to go about figuring out what the system was, and just the way that like Data's curiosity kind of bit him in the ass.
Yeah, curiosity killed the cat. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because he becomes almost taken over by this virus, and so where normally it would have been a situation where when they get in trouble, Data can just be like, okay, well, I'll just stay here because, I'm technically not alive. So anything that happens, like if we lose atmosphere, it's not a big deal. If they have poison, it's not a big deal. And it ended up being something where like Picard really had to kind of put his money where his mouth is as the captain of the ship and be like, no, if something happens, I'm going to be the one who does this. Like, I'm going to be the one that makes sure that this ends, everything stops. And, I'll be the one who goes down with the ship, so to speak, even though, obviously he wasn't on the ship.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And in the end of it, it was Data. Data figured out how to outsmart the computer. They were able to. Data rebooted himself, and they turned around and rebooted the Enterprise computer. They were then able to, send it to the Romulans and kind of selfishly save them. And then Picard was able to engineer a, kind of auto overload where the Iconian stuff was destroyed. So yeah, cool, very cool Star Trek-y plot. So this was, I thought, a very much a bright spot of season 2. And again, Katie, you'll appreciate this. Not very much Dr. Pulaski in this episode, which I think probably helped a lot. Even though she did have one snotty scene where she was like cutting up one of her medical techs. She's like, yeah, dude, use a split because he's got a broken leg. And he's like, that's not practically medicine, whatever. And he's like, no, dickhead, you use a piece of wood or whatever to keep a leg immobile, and that's regular medicine with your, with your hands and your heart and your head. Kind of like one of these, read a book or whatever, dude. It's just like, she's just very snide, which, yeah.
I mean, I also liked the moments because they're talking about this Iconian race, and they're saying, like, oh, well, they were able to like travel great, distances, and that, I felt like they were kind of having this critique a little bit of like colonizer vibes of being like,
very,
yeah,
100%.
Just because you can travel doesn't mean you should travel and then take over other worlds.
Yeah, demons of air and darkness, I believe was the description. Yeah, it was total colonizer vibes. Total like, hey, we're here to bring you Christianity and give you smallpox blankets. It's not a good thing. It's a big thumbs down. All right, moving on. Episode 12 is the Royale. Katie, all you.
Yes. The Enterprise investigates the wreckage of a 21st century spaceship orbiting a distant planet at the appearance of a casino with inhabitants based on a rather poorly written paperback novel. It's called The Royale. The director was Cliff Boyle and Tracy Torme.
Mm-hmm.
And it was aired March 27th, 1989.
What a fun throwaway episode. Again, it has zero bearing or relevance on anything at all. It's very much a filler episode, but they have some super fun moments. They have and again I just pluck it out of my memory of remembering ridiculous things. They have a guest star who's pretty famous in TV circles. His name is Noble Willingham, older gentleman. He was the older guy who was kind of seducing the younger woman at the tables, and he was just kind of, I think he went by Tex, and he had a big cowboy hat and stuff.
Oh yes,
and
he did.
It's just like, and again, it was everything. It was a poorly written novel, but every single character was a super duper lame ass stereotype. You had the bellboy who was in love with the girl who was the
Rita.
gangster's girlfriend. Yeah, Rita, she was, you got her hooked on the smack and blah, blah, blah. And then you had, like I said, the card shark who was seducing the young woman. And then you had the hotel manager who was very by the button. And it's all, really revealed that, an alien race back in the 21st century somehow swept up this Earth probe, the Shabidris or Cabidris. It had a weird name. And the only person who survived was the commander of the mission, who they stuck him in this recreation of the book that was on his ship. And it's like basically like Nema's shitty, but like a Fabio novel that you would find in the grocery store checkout lane. Think about if instead of dying, you ended up stuck in that novel for the rest of your life. Worst purgatory. It'd be like if you were stuck in the Twilight novels for the rest of your life, and you were Bella, or I was Edward, you know what I mean? So, again, a super throwaway episode. Obviously, at the end, our gang figures out how to get out, and I thought it was fun, but again, largely irrelevant.
It was definitely. It felt like they just. I feel like they sometimes Star Trek.
Whoa,
hello, has this kind of self-awareness where they're like, we are sometimes cheesy and we're just going to lean into that. Like every time this bellboy showed up and started talking about Rita and Mickey D, you'd have this like really bad, like cliche, like kind of Casablanca music start playing,
right.
Like on cue immediately. And, Mickey D comes in and you can tell he's the bad guy because he's got his trench coat on, but he's not wearing the sleeves. It's just draped over his shoulders and he's in a white suit. And it's just it's so fun. I mean, there were some really fun because they see the commander's old uniform and they see that it's got 52 stars on it, and it's so Data says it's somewhere between like 2033 and 2079 is
right.
Where they put the data. And I'm like, wait, please don't tell me it takes us like another 20 or like another 11 years to finally give Puerto Rico statehood. And then what happens in 2079?
Well, actually, it's
do we finally let Hawaii secede?
in 27, it's funny because in 2079, here's a little inside baseball for you. That was the setting of Q's courtroom in the Encounter at Farpoint, the first episode. Right. So that was supposed to be the post-atomic horror, even though we know that World War III took place in 2053, because in 2063 is when first contact took place between the humans and the Vulcans. So I'm not exactly sure. So I'm going to go with I'm not exactly sure, and then we will move on. So
I mean, literally, I paused the episode because I was like, wait, what does this mean? And I'm like looking at the states list because I'm like, wait, what happened? How many do we get this many states?
Oh my gosh! Holy cow! It's a conundrum. It's a conundrum wrapped in a vest.
But it's nothing I love about Star Trek.
Exactly correct. All right, episode 13 of the season, Time Squared, directed by Joseph L. Scanlon. Screenplay: Kurt Michael Bensmiller and Maurice Hurley, from April 3rd of 1989. Boy, they don't really give us much here. The Enterprise discovers a duplicate of Picard from 6 hours in the future. Well, come on, bury the lead here. Again, super duper Star Trek-y kind of plot line. You got a twist in time. You have should we do this? Should we do that? What's going to result in us surviving. Because again, Enterprise is going along. They find the shuttle pod floating in space. They bring it in, and a comatose Captain Picard is sitting in there. And once they manage to revitalize the systems of the shuttle, he has a log entry which shows that they were trapped in this anomaly, and Picard jumped on a shuttle pod hoping that because the anomaly was focused on him, if he left, the anomaly would let the Enterprise escape, and it didn't. It blew the Enterprise up. So, the closer, as they're going through this mystery and trying to figure out what to do, as they get closer to the time, the other Picard wakes up, and the current Picard has to find a way to resolve it, which is just awesome. His idea to resolve it is he just kills the other guy. So I'm like,
O'Brien's face when he does that is just like
what the fuck?
Just sitting there like, so we now have learned we do not fuck with Picard because he will just like shank you. I think no regrets.
I think now don't F blank blank K with Picard is the name of this episode.
Yeah, you don't at all, right? Because it was just like he gets out and he just turns around and like not even hesitation, just straight up. And so like that point I was like, is that technically a suicide or is that a murder? Like how is this the I'm my own grandpa situation?
That is the classic murder suicide, but it's with the same person.
Yeah,
the same person, but it's two. I don't. Oh my god, I have no idea. I have no idea. So anyway, yeah, cool episode. But again, it's very Star Trek-y. And again, I wouldn't say it was a throwaway, but I think it, kind of proved that Picard he's very analytical. He figured out that the only way to end the only way to end the standoff was to eliminate the recurrent factor, which was this other Picard who's like, I can only do this one thing. And then they turned around and they just flew at the center of the cloud and then they got out.
Yeah.
So yeah, the wonders of space stuff. So moving on, this next episode is again one of my favorites of season 2. So go ahead, please.
Oh yes. The Icarus Factor, or no?
Yes.
The Icarus Factor by Robert S. Cove, and it's got Robert McCullough and David Assail. When Commander Riker is offered a command of the starship Ares, his estranged father, Kyle Riker, is sent by Starfleet to brief him on the mission. Meanwhile, Data, LaForge, Dr. Pulaski, Wesley, and O'Brien help Worf celebrate the anniversary of his rite of ascension.
Oh, there's so much going on in this episode. Oh my god! Again, as a father who has pretty complicated relationships with my kids, I have a stepson, and then I have 2 sons of my own, all endlessly complicated relationships. Father-son stuff is it's in a lot of ways the same as mother-daughter stuff. You know what I mean? And I think
a lot less blind jujitsu going on with
a lot less. Yes, I agree that even though my father and I have had a complicated relationship and we're very close now, there was at no point did we engage in martial arts to kind of settle our differences. But no, there's a lot of kind of Riker's backstory revealed here. His father basically abandoned him when he was 15, which is apparently not a big deal in the legal machinations of 24th century Earth. It's just kind of like,
it is a big deal. I think it's just Riker then had to make his own way,
right?
Because I think that Kyle didn't think it was a big deal because he basically told him to get over it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's really revealed, here and then a little bit later on in other episodes that Riker's mother died when he was 5 years old. They didn't necessarily say why, but that was kind of the breaking point between father and son. They could never really put it back together after that time, and eventually, Kyle Riker just went off chasing his career, and Will Riker just kind of grew up on his own. They never really got into that. But Will Riker was an incredibly driven individual. He went off to Starfleet Academy. He, relentlessly pursued a career and became, first officer of the Enterprise before he was age 30. So he was a big shot. But yeah, his dad coming back after a 15-year absence really shook him to the core. And again, this episode, as both a father and a son, really spoke to me and always has. And I watched this one and I'm like, I really intently pay attention to it. And then the interaction between Riker and Troy when Riker thinks he's leaving is again very touching to me. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because again, the underlying love that exists between these two characters that they can just never finally get out of their own way and say we should be together because you're my soulmate, I'm yours. But let's do this dance for the next 15 years. Why not? Because it's TV. Was great, and I do love it at the end that there was some variety of closure between father and son. We don't end up seeing the Kyle Riker character again. But in a lot of ways, we don't necessarily need to, because we kind of got, in my opinion, everything we needed out of this episode was seeing them starting on a road to redemption. So we don't need to have, they're going on vacation together, or his dad gets remarried and has another kid or something. It's like, we don't need any of that bullshit. Mm-mm, so this I thought was pretty concise. The other part of it with Worf and his rite of ascension, fun trivia piece. One of the Klingons in the holodeck sequence where Worf is getting stabbed with the pain sticks, played by Entertainment Tonight host John Tesh. No shit. If you even know who that is, which I don't know if you do.
I do, yes. Holy cow.
Okay, good. No, absolutely did. There was a making of, and if you watch, and God, they're gone now. But no, TNG is still on Netflix. If you scroll to, I think, like, you watch all the episodes and you get through season 7, there's a documentary hosted by Jonathan Frakes that was produced at the time of the last episode. And I think there's a little segment where John Tesh comes on and says, I was one of the Klingons that was stabbing him or whatever. So that's how I know about it. But that was pretty cool. And this was, again, kind of pre Ronald D. Moore, who comes along as a writer in season 3 and becomes kind of the architect of all modern Klingon stories. This was the story that kind of predated that and established that rite of ascension as the fact that, a Klingon society is all about torture.
Well, on its surface, yes, but I would also say that they very specifically wrote this story with Worf to kind of act as a juxtaposition between Riker having his dad there and being forced in this, repeatedly feeling forced into this familiar relationship,
right?
And Worf mourning the fact that he doesn't have a family to go through this rite of ascension
or a culture. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so at the end of it, you have it where Worf is realizing that he has, the found family mentality, because while Data is going through saying, first off, let's take a pause and appreciate we need 100% Worf. Or more Worf yelling at Wesley. Just 100% more. I loved how it just starts out and he just basically tells
enough!
him. He tells him to shove off, and I love it.
And 100% Worf going to Data, with all due respect, be gone!
Right?
Sir.
Sir, just so much disrespectful respect. I love it.
Right, yeah. But, with all due respect, go fuck yourself. Thank you.
Right, exactly. So there was never even a pause when Data's explaining this ritual of saying, they stab him with these poles, and then he says, and his family's at the end to receive him, and someone says, oh, well, his family's not here, and they go, okay, well then we'll be there. There was never even a question or a weirdness of like, oh, well, would that be okay for us to be there? Is that going to be like awkward? Do you think Worf would consider us family? It was immediately like, nope, we're his family. We will definitely be there at the end to like kind of help pick him up after he's gone through this really traumatic thing.
Right.
And that was really beautiful, especially with having it juxtaposition with Riker having to deal with his dad. And I was really interested to see what your take was. Obviously, I am presenting as a woman, so I have a lot to talk about with the mother-daughter stuff, but not so much about the father-son. I do have a very difficult relationship with, my mother, where it's felt very much for me, this episode was almost triggering because like Kyle is very much a classic narcissist as far as like the abuse that he put Riker through. Just his entire thing is, what about me and my needs? He's very competitive. You find out that he cheated while he was like training his son in this battle technique because he just couldn't handle the idea of losing to him because everything had to be about him. And even when you have, Riker being 5 and losing his mother, Kyle's sitting there going, well, she was my wife. How do you think that made me feel? And I'm like, oh, my word.
Me, exactly.
Right. And so it's a very
typical male archetype and fathers and sons being males. It's back and forth, the child
it was the like embodiment of toxic masculinity in a lot of ways.
No, absolutely. The child may think me, but the adult may think me. And there's got to be this mentality of us and us sharing this experience.
Right.
And
well, and at one point, one of them is 5. So them
Right.
saying me is understandable at that point.
Right. Somebody's got to be the adult. And in this case,
Right.
nobody was. And so, yeah, it took an extra 20 years for them to get this resolved. But
Mhm.
they did, which to me, I think is very important for all fathers and sons to think that, and again, I have a almost 22-year-old son, and we've been estranged for a lot of years, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And I have those same hopes that, I have these same hopes that on the back deck of my house one day, he and my younger son and I, many years from now, will sit and share a beer and we will work our shit out.
Mhm.
Because I'm a believer in the fact that life is long, and there is, every day is a chance to get things right if you can just swallow your pride and speak honestly, be humble, and to compromise and to
Right.
listen.
And
There's
honestly, I feel like they never really did that in this episode.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, it could be, does that happen later on? There is kind of a sitcom-y vibe of how they wrap it up, like,
Mhm.
I love you, son. And so, something happened off screen or in a book somewhere that they got it, wrapped up later on. But regardless, I mean, you're right. I think you're right. The juxtaposition between the Worf story and the Riker story, I think provided great character development for both characters. I was super happy with it. So, anyway, moving on to kind of an insignificant episode before we get to the big enchilada. This would be episode 15, Pen Pals, directed by Winrich Colby, who actually went on to direct Star Trek Generations, I think. So he's a kind of a big name in TNG. Written by Hannah Louise, screenplay by Hannah Louise Shearer, teleplay by Melinda Snodgrass. From May of 1989, Data makes contact with a young girl. Tired ass plotline from a pre-warp civilization on a planet facing imminent annihilation. The Enterprise must wrestle with the moral dilemma of violating the Prime Directive we're standing by while Data's friend dies. So you're right. That's the A story. And it has the young girl, heavily under makeup, is actress Nikki Cox, who went on to have her own sitcom and some different stuff. It's just Google it, and she grew up to be a young lady who had her own sitcom later on. So one of those like Kirsten Dunst was in a later episode of TNG when she was young. So,
I did not know that.
as was Ashley Judd, who was Wesley's girlfriend in a season 5 episode. But the B story was Wesley getting his first chance to command people and kind of getting kicked around, which is not surprising because that's kind of what Wesley does. Did I find it to be kind of a forgettable episode? Yeah, I kind of did. It didn't. It's wedged between two, to me, monumental episodes of season 2, and one of which is monumental to the entire Star Trek franchise, which we'll talk about in a minute. So this episode was kind of meh to me. I don't know. I mean, what did you think?
Yeah, it was. I'm going to be honest. I grew up on a ranch, so when Picard called for an Arabian, I was like, okay, are they going to actually give me an Arabian? Because I know what that horse looks like, and they did. And he also seems to be a decent rider, because those are always the two things I look at whenever someone tries to get on a horse.
I had zero idea that was your background. My father and my stepmother are avid equestrians. They each have horses that they stable at a farm in Metamora, Michigan, which is actually Todd's hometown. You want to talk about small world? That's over.
Small world,
yeah. Over in eastern Michigan, east of Flint, Michigan. So yeah, isn't that funny? So I've been around a lot. Yeah, I had no idea. That's really interesting.
Yeah. But it seemed very strange that Data would first off make contact. Like, I get his initial answering of the question because he just gets this voice of, is anyone out there? Just asking, is anyone out there? And he says yes, because he's answering a question. Right. But the fact that he wouldn't immediately go to Picard and be like, hey, I just found this civilization. They're reaching out and I may have answered them. Like, that seemed very strange. Because then he randomly shows up and is like, oh, by the way, for the last 8 weeks, I've been talking to this
know.
girl.
It's like, dude. And he's a friggin' android. He's very by the book. You wouldn't think that he would just go rogue on something like this. So it seems, you're right. It seems very out of character that there would have been this big gap in the time frame that it would have been like this. So yeah, that seemed very weird to me. I totally agree.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I think that overall, I liked the conversations that were going on as far as like what happens when you violate the Prime Directive, and Picard is talking to the core team, and he's like, okay, well, is it okay if we violate it if there is a famine or a plague? Is it okay if we violate it if, we realize there's a meteor that's going to be crashing down? And they're like, well, yeah, sure. And, Pulaski's really avid about this. And I can understand from her perspective that she is talking, she obviously is, protecting life, protecting, and nurturing and making sure everyone is safe. That is very much a core tenet. She becomes kind of this gruff mom kind of figure where she's, she's tough, but she's fair.
Right.
Yeah. And I loved it because he goes, well, what about war? If they're, or enslavement, do we go then? And I was like, well, those are man, quote, or I guess living entity made problems where, family.
Yeah, come on, man. Women could do that too, It's equality.
Well, I was also talking, not necessarily humanoid problems, but obviously sentient life problems. So I was like, that seems like that would be a difference. But there were some really great conversations that were going on with the Prime Directive, but it seemed like because there was so much other stuff going on in the conversation or in the episode that it didn't really get a chance to have that meat to it.
Yeah.
And I think if they would have just let given some of that time away from Wesley being like, oh, I don't know how to be a leader. Like, come on, Wesley.
Yeah, exactly. Nut up or shut up. There's your Wesley line right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like, well, I don't think the guys push me around because you won't do what I want or whatever. It's like, shut up. There's another shut up Wesley for you right there.
Right, exactly.
Look at the back of my hand. Slap. Bad news.
And so I wish that they would have kind of taken some of that out so you could have had some of those bigger moments, because it seemed like unless you're giving the writers and the directors a chance to really stew on it, you're not going to get those episodes like we had with the trial and that sort of thing, because those episodes were more singularly focused on that kind of issue of humanity and question of the moral gray.
Right.
Then they were really able to create a meaty episode out of it.
Right, which is Star Trek's sweet spot and always has been. That, exactly. That moral dilemma and the impossible choice and trying to figure out exactly what to do. So, well, this next episode, which is one of the landmark of the early, there's no right choice in this one. This is episode 16, Q Who? Directed by Rob Bowman, written by Maurice Hurley. From May of 1989, Q throws the Enterprise into uncharted space where it encounters and is engaged by a dangerous alien vessel of a previously unknown species, the Borg! Yes! When the vessel, my screen went dark, when the vessel instantly and effortlessly overwhelms the Enterprise, Picard realizes that the Federation may not be as ready for the future as they thought. Woo! Oh my God. This was, like I said, of benchmark episodes where it's just like, oh my God.
We really, going on.
We meet our first intractable Star Trek enemy. They really can't be beat. You might think you get an advantage because you zap one. And, from that very first one that, Q comes along and he's like, I want to be a member of the crew because and then we find out that Guinan shows up and she's like, yeah, this guy's a total dickhead. You ought to really send him away. And he says, she's totally awful. You got to send her away. So
let's take a pause here and talk about how Guinan and Q know each other and have had run-ins in the past.
And don't you think that might show up in Picard is season 2 because both characters are in it? Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Because there's so much that I need to know about Guinan's character, because
she
immediately does like this like cat mantis her karate type stance of trying to she's and Q is calling her an imp, and I'm like, Q, you're not a good judge of character. In fact, I think Picard even says something like that, where he's like, you're describing yourself
as
of chaos.
I love her. You know what? That would be a great episode. How would we put her karate stance into a title for the episode? Give me something.
I have no idea. No idea.
If something comes to us, we will. But anyway, Q says Picard is like, we're good. We're can face whatever's going on out here. And Q's like, oh, really? Snap. And then they end up in the path of a Borg cube.
Which, to be fair, that was not something that Picard was going to be facing anytime soon, except for Q threw him 7 years out
Yeah,
of his range from
exactly.
the nearest starbase.
Right. So yeah, you're right. The Borg would have kind of flopped along eventually. And it's funny because the further Star Trek goes along, and obviously Star Trek Voyager with the character of Seven of Nine really, really, really develops the Borg culture. And we find out that, they travel and they have big transwarp hubs throughout the galaxy that they can instantaneously go from point A to point B. So it's weird that they even hadn't found Earth by this point. But again, the universe, the galaxy being so vast, they've got, lots of other things to do before they get to, to the Federation, which is just like, well, the Federation is whatever. But yeah, the Borg instantly say, well, and even Q says, well, they've identified your vessel as something that they want to consume. And then they set out to do exactly that. They cut off a piece of the hull, and 18 people die in the process, and they're analyzing it. And then from that point, where previously they could shoot a phaser beam and knock a Borg drone out because one of them beamed into engineering, and that's what Worf had to do. They start shooting phaser beams and firing torpedoes, and the Borg have adapted, though they don't say at this point. But the Borg quickly analyze and adapt any technology they encounter, and they find a way to get around it. So they truly are undefeatable because, again, functioning as a hive mind. You blow up that one ship and they're like, oh, good, we're good. Nope, there's just another 50 ships that are going to show up. And again, it becomes a much bigger piece of not only, at the end of next season, the Best of Both Worlds two-parter where the Borg finally make their big play, but all throughout Voyager of just how friggin' scary the Borg really are, because all they really want is you to become part of their collective. They don't have any political aims. They're not malevolent. They simply have this one goal to absorb everything. They don't explore. They absorb. So at the end of it, Q says, well, I guess you learned your lesson. So he shoots him back again. And then, you see Guinan and Picard playing chess at the end of it. And I loved his line saying, well, maybe what Q gave us was what we really needed, which was a kick in our complacency, which basically is a kick in the ass to say, hey, pull your head out of your rear end because you're not ready. And maybe you really ought to spend a little bit more time figuring out that you don't need to go out so far because there's scary shit out there and you're not ready for it.
Well, and it's that I felt like the episodes you were watching, there was just a theme of juxtaposition because you had this kind of back and forth between Picard and Q, which really they end up being kind of two sides of the same coin again, where you have Picard who knows and respects Q and who he is and what he can do, because there's a point where he says something to Q and Q flat out asks him, oh, are you mocking me? And he's like, no, absolutely not. You are exactly who we are out here to try to discover, which are unknown life forms of unknown power and unknown origins. You basically saying you are exactly what Starfleet wants to find. You are it. You are the, culmination of everything we've worked for. And then Q at the end is, making Picard basically beg to say, hey, Q, we need your help.
Yeah, right.
We are out of our depth. We don't know what we're doing. We're all going to die. And Q is like, oh, takes a big man to be able to admit when they're wrong. And I'm like, this is Picard, though. Picard has no issue saying we're out of our depth, because that's why he's so good at his job, is because he can look and analyze something and be like, this isn't going to work, so we need to find a different way.
Yeah, where Kirk would have been like, let's just die shooting at him. Woo!
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And
right.
It became one of those things where Q just inherently doesn't understand who Picard is or what drives Picard, because Q can't understand not being just fully involved with yourself.
Right.
And it becomes one of those things where, Starfleet, they want to go out and they discover, but they are limited by their, by their literal physicality and the self-imposed, regulations through like the Prime Directive and everything, where Q has no such boundaries and he just interferes as he sees fit, because that's what Q does. He is, he's a little chaos goblin, essentially.
Right.
And so it's kind of, he's out there exploring and messing with everything. And Starfleet's like, yeah, we want to explore, but we're going to explore within our means. And so that's where you get that kind of duality going.
Chaos Goblin, now the Chaos Goblin, now the name of the episode.
There you go.
Oh, I love it. Oh, this is good stuff. So And with that, we wrap. So, Katie, so we're on to the third segment of season 2. I think this was an improvement over segment 2 to me. I
definitely.
think it had my 2 favorite episodes of the season and possibly a third with Contagion. So, yeah, I like it. I will absolutely tell you, I will not have that same opinion of the first segment because just I was getting our flows updated and looking at those episodes and I'm like, oh, there's some stinkers in here. And including the absolute worst ending to the season, which I will not spoil for anyone who's not seen it. But again, if you're listening to this and you've not seen this, please go in, feel free to go in, watch the episodes and give us your own thoughts on this episode by hitting us up on Twitter or certainly at the Facebook group. But Katie, your thoughts on the segment? Do you agree? Was this an improvement?
Yeah, I think there was some hits and misses. I think overall it was good. I mean, I do have to say, just on episode 16, I'm sad that Sonia didn't get more playtime. She was the kind of character that she ended up spilling hot chocolate onto Picard. She was like the first character that showed up. And she definitely was kind of coded as neurodivergent, I think. But they just kind of wrote her off as kind of ditzy, but she does come back in Lower Decks.
Exactly. And we're going to be talking about
her
it.
In Lower Decks.
She's great. And she also had non-canonically, she had a long run in an ebook series called, I think, Starfleet Corps of Engineers, though I've never read it myself. I was aware of her involvement. So regardless, loved it. And but anyway, that's our show for this week. So Katie, do your honors, please, and take us up on out of here.
Yeah, you can find us online at the new secretfriendsunite.com and hit us up at secretfriendsu on Twitter and let us know what you're enjoying in the Trek world. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit us on Public Tea for all kinds of swag.
You got it. And as always, for more information about Starfleet International, please feel free to visit the Grand Petoskey and Region 13 on Facebook. Friends, as always, thank you for joining us. I'm going to tell you that sharing is caring and to keep on trekking.
Wherever you go boldly.
This podcast is part of the Secret Friends Unite podcasting network. Visit secretfriendsunite.com for more great shows, articles, news, reviews, and more. Secret Friends Unite podcasts are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and other podcast services around the world. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, you can join us on Facebook or our new Discord server, or follow at Secret Friends U on Twitter. Please subscribe to Secret Friends Unite on YouTube and visit our merch store at tpublic.com. Just search Secret Friends Unite. Thanks for listening.